They could have changed the course of the war, but they turned into ghosts. Giant aircraft, capable of carrying record loads and reaching unprecedented altitudes, were deemed unnecessary just 2 weeks after their first flight. Who convinced Goering to abandon a weapon that could have paralyzed enemy factories? This story has it all. Secret negotiations, the death of a general, backstage struggles at the top, records set against prohibitions, and the mysterious fate of prototypes that seemed to vanish into the fog. Most chillingly, the abandonment of these machines became one of the reasons for defeats in crucial battles. Watch until the end, because it's the finale that explains why the Ju-89 remained a symbol of unfulfilled power. When the first units of the new military aviation were being created in Germany in the early 30s, its leaders already understood that future wars would not resemble past ones. The idea of lightning-fast strikes emerged, where not only the army at the front, but also factories deep within enemy territory could become targets. Walter Wever, chief of staff of the young Luftwaffe, clearly saw that the future would be decided not just by dive bombers or fighters. He believed the outcome of the struggle would be determined by the ability to strike at the industrial heart of the enemy, depriving them of weapons and fuel before those weapons even reached the battlefield. This required technology on a completely different scale than what existed at the time. It needed not just a long-range aircraft, but a true aerial giant capable of carrying thousands of kilograms of bombs and crossing half a continent without refueling. Wever called such machines long-range heavy bombers and saw them as the main instrument of the coming war. His vision was rare among his colleagues. Most military officers still relied on classic concepts of frontline aviation, limited to the troop engagement line. Wever looked further, towards factory chimneys and railway junctions deep within enemy territory. He understood that realizing such a project would require immense effort, new materials, powerful engines, a well-thought-out design. After all, the load on such machines would be colossal. However, it was precisely in early 1933, as the Luftwaffe began to form in circumvention of previous limitations, that Wever managed to convey his vision to the designers. He secretly discussed plans with the leaders of Germany's leading aviation companies, urging them to consider creating not just another aircraft, but an entirely new category of weaponry that could change the rules of war. The idea of strategic strikes was born not in politicians' offices, but in the minds of engineers and officers convinced that without such machines, Germany would again find itself cornered as it had been 20 years prior. Wever sought to get ahead of time, before adversaries could develop similar weapons. It was then that the dream of a long-range bomber, destined to be the shield and sword of the new Third Reich in the future war, took root. In an atmosphere where any leak could lead to an international scandal, Walter Wever began cautious negotiations with Germany's leading aircraft manufacturers. At stake was an idea that would transform the Luftwaffe from a ground support tool into a force capable of dictating terms at a strategic level. He understood that if an aircraft could be built to reach industrial centers far beyond the Urals, the enemy would be paralyzed before they could even assemble an army. This is why the program received the unofficial designation, Ural Bomber. Wever approached two of the largest and most experienced companies, Dornier and Junkers. Both concerns possessed not only the technical capabilities, but also the experience in building heavy machines. He demanded the impossible from them: to combine range, payload capacity, and reliability in a single aircraft capable of carrying dozens of bombs and covering thousands of kilometers non-stop. The project's secrecy was so high that even many high-ranking officials knew of it only through rumors. The order stipulated the construction of a pair of prototypes first, followed by a small series for refinement. For a state that had just begun rapid rearmament, this was a huge step. But Wever's ambitions outweighed his caution. He saw these machines as the key to future victory. Thus, by mid-1935, the Aviation Ministry approved orders for 2 prototypes from each company. Thus, in the shadow of official programs, 2 competitors emerged, the Dornier Du-19 and the Junkers Ju at 6. 1989. Both aircraft were intended to be symbols of the new direction. Yet the very nature of the task spoke of the scale of the concept. In creating the Ural project, Germany was effectively challenging the future, betting on a weapon that could change the very character of war. The rivalry between the two giants began the moment the Aviation Ministry approved the order. Dornier presented its Doom-19 project, and Junkers offered the Ju-89. Both aircraft appeared to be a genuine breakthrough for the mid-30s, when machines of far smaller size and capability were considered standard. Their design embodied Germany's ambition to prove it could not only catch up to aviation powers, but surpass them. The projects differed significantly in philosophy. The Do-19 appeared more conservative. It was a four-engine aircraft that relied on proven solutions. Junkers, in contrast, sought to push beyond the conventional. Its machine promised to be heavier, with immense power reserves and the ability to carry colossal loads. Hopes were pinned on it by those who dreamed of true strategic weapons. Prototype construction began in mid-1935, and the very atmosphere surrounding the projects was filled with tension and anticipation. For the engineers, it was the challenge of a lifetime, to build an aircraft that could fly across half a continent while maintaining stability and controllability. Politicians, meanwhile, saw these machines as instruments of pressure, capable of instilling fear in neighboring countries merely by their existence. The fate of the entire project changed in an instant. In early summer 1936, Walter Wever died in an air crash, and with him disappeared the main champion of the strategic strike idea. His successors were Albert Kesselring, Ernst Udet, and Hans Jeschonnek, men with a completely different view of aviation's future. They believed not in long-range raids against factories deep in enemy territory, but in a swift blitzkrieg where rapid strikes against enemy troops at the front were paramount. Instead of heavy machines that consumed vast amounts of fuel and metal, the new leaders bet on light and medium bombers. They could be mass-produced, quickly put into service, and used for army support. Kesselring convinced his colleagues that Germany could not afford to spend resources on giants. The same materials could be used to build 2.5 tactical aircraft, which would be more beneficial in offensive operations. Udet, on the other hand, was a proponent of dive bombers, believing they were capable of breaking through defenses and striking with pinpoint accuracy. Goering easily succumbed to these arguments. He was more impressed by the numbers and reports than the scale of individual projects. As he once told Erhard Milch, the Führer is interested not in the size of the planes, but in their quantity. In these words lay the death sentence for the entire program. When the fate of the heavy bombers became a subject of discussion at the highest levels, the project's opponents found compelling arguments. First and foremost, it was about resources. Germany was only just ramping up its production of aluminum and other strategic materials, and every kilogram counted. One giant required as much metal as several medium-sized machines combined, which seemed an unaffordable luxury for a country preparing for a major war. The fuel problem was equally acute. Engines capable of lifting such behemoths devoured fuel in unbelievable quantities. For war planners, this meant one thing. A heavy bomber could fly far, but each such mission would cost an entire fuel depot. In a situation where even supplies for the Army and Navy were insufficient, such expenditure seemed senseless. The arguments were reinforced by simple arithmetic. In place of one large aircraft, 2 or even 3 tactical bombers could be built. Mass production became the main trump card of the Ural project's opponents. Light and medium machines were easier to maintain, faster to produce, and simpler for crews to learn. They could be thrown into battle by the dozens, supporting the rapid advance of ground troops. Spring 1937 marked a moment of truth for the Junkers engineers. The first prototype, designated Ju-89 V1, rolled out of the workshop and prepared for its maiden flight. The enormous machine with its 4 powerful engines and a wingspan comparable to a small house inspired awe even on the ground. On April 11th, test pilot Hans Hatzelbach took it into the air. For the observers, it was a thrilling moment. A true aerial fortress appeared in the sky, a symbol of what Walter Wever had strived for. The flight was successful. The aircraft showed stability and controllability, and the engineers noted its immense potential for further development. Despite its impressive size, the plane behaved predictably and obediently, instilling confidence in its future. It seemed that soon, Germany would have the very long-range bomber that could have shifted the balance of power in the upcoming war. But just 2.5 weeks after this triumph, news broke that shattered all hopes. On April 29th, the Aviation Ministry announced the cessation of further work on both the Ju-89 and its competitor, the Du-19. The reasons cited were simple: excessive fuel consumption, high material costs, and lengthy production cycles. In an era focused on blitzkrieg and mass deployment of tactical aviation, giants were deemed unnecessary. For the designers and test pilots, it was a blow. Just yesterday, they had seen their creation confidently soaring in the sky, and today they were told the project was canceled. The first flights, which were meant to herald a new era, became the final punctuation mark on the dream of a German strategic bomber. Despite the official program cancellation, Juncker's engineers were in no hurry to abandon their creation. The second prototype, designated V2, was already nearing completion, and the company's management decided to finish it. In the summer of 1937, the machine took to the air, as if defying orders from above. It continued to fly, demonstrating new capabilities and confirming that the project was not just bold, but technically viable. Tests showed that for such a giant, the Ju-89 possessed surprising stability and reliability. Its handling was easier than expected, and its behavior at altitude commanded respect even from skeptics. Engineers noted its vast power reserves, allowing it to carry impressive loads. Pilots admitted that when they took the controls, they felt like masters of the sky. Simultaneously, construction began on a third prototype, intended to be even more advanced. However, after the program's closure, work halted at the frame stage. It remained in the hangar, a silent symbol of unfulfilled hopes. Summer 1938 became the time when the Ju-89 truly showed the world what it was capable of. The second prototype, even though the project was officially closed, was used for flight tests. It was then that Juncker's engineers decided on a step that was meant to prove their creation's worth: testing the machine to its limits. On June 4th, that very aircraft, designated V2, took off with 5,000 kg of cargo on board. At an altitude of over 9,000 meters, it set a world record, exceeding all expectations. A few days later, on June 8th, the results were even more impressive. The Ju-89 reached 7,200 meters with a payload of 10,000 kilograms. For its time, this was a truly fantastic achievement. Even the British short Stirling, built considerably later and considered the pride of the Royal Air Force, could not boast such results under similar conditions. These records became the final argument for the engineers and test pilots trying to convince management that abandoning such a promising aircraft was a mistake. But the corridors of power had already made a different decision. Blitzkrieg demanded light and medium machines, and heavy giants were left without a future. After the records were set, the fate of the prototypes lost its shine. By the end of 1938, both built Ju-89s were transferred to the Luftwaffe, where they found an unexpected role as heavy transport aircraft. Instead of long raids on enemy industry, these machines transported cargo and personnel, fulfilling tasks far less impressive than Walter Wever had envisioned. For a time, the prototypes served reliably, but their story remained unclear. Some sources claimed that by the end of 1939, both aircraft were dismantled for scrap. Others suggested that one of them was still flying in Norway at the beginning of the next year. These rumors were fueled by eyewitness accounts, claiming to have seen unusually large four-engine aircraft at local airfields. Historians still debate the veracity of these testimonies. Some consider them mistaken, as Germany had very few such heavy aircraft. Others allow that one of the prototypes might indeed have been used for special transport. Be that as it may, no documentary evidence has survived, and the fate of the Ju-89 remains shrouded in twilight. When the military deemed heavy bombers an unnecessary luxury, interest from civil aviation unexpectedly emerged. The German airline Lufthansa had closely followed the Ju-89's tests and saw in it not a military threat, but an opportunity to create a new level of passenger airliner. Its impressive payload capacity and flight stability suggested that a machine capable of carrying a large number of passengers over long distances could be built based on this aircraft. Thus arose the idea of converting the unfinished third prototype into a civilian version. Work on it no longer had military status, so designers could approach the task differently, remove the bomb bay, alter the layout, and expand the interior space. From these modifications emerged the Ju-90, a new type of aircraft that became a bridge from the failed strategic bomber to a whole line of peaceful machines. The Ju-90 opened a new direction for Junkers. It showed that even a project deemed unpromising in the military sphere could give rise to a useful development. Civil aviation inherited not only a powerful airframe from the Ural project, but also the experience of building large aircraft, which subsequently formed the foundation for future models. The story of the Ju-89 remains an example of how decisions made in offices can change the course of entire wars. When Germany abandoned heavy bombers, the bet on Blitzkrieg seemed logical. The initial campaigns indeed confirmed the correctness of this choice. Light and medium machines supported advancing troops. The army moved rapidly, and it seemed the strategy had paid off. But during the Battle of Britain, it became clear that without long-range aircraft, the Luftwaffe was powerless against the island nation. Tactical bombers could strike coastal targets and cities, but lacked the capability to systematically destroy industry deep within the country. Factories continued to operate, airfields remained functional, and British aviation grew stronger each day. The very strike that was meant to paralyze the enemy never occurred. The situation repeated itself on the Eastern Front. During the operation against the Soviet Union, German aviation again operated alongside the troops, but was deprived of the ability to destroy major industrial centers beyond the Urals. Factories continued to produce tanks and aircraft even when the front was only a few hundred kilometers from Moscow. The rejection of strategic bombers, driven by considerations of economy and the doctrine of blitzkrieg, turned out to be a grave miscalculation. The Ju-89 could have been the weapon that Germany so desperately lacked in the decisive moments of the war, but it remained only a prototype, a symbol of a missed opportunity that could have changed the course of history. Although the Ju-89 itself never went into serial production, its shadow lingered long in German aviation. The experience gained during its creation and testing was used in subsequent Junkers projects. Designers learned to work with large airframes, tested structural integrity, managed weight and balance, and developed control systems for machines that, in terms of size and load, far exceeded the norm. All of this became the basis for future models, including passenger aircraft that grew out of the idea of the unfinished prototype. The Ju-89 also became a reflection of the entire German aviation doctrine. Germany bet on speed and mass production, abandoning long-term strategy in favor of swift victories. Ultimately, it was this decision that resulted in the Luftwaffe lacking the tools to destroy its opponent's economic base. In history, this aircraft remains a symbol of how even the most advanced engineering concepts can be buried by political calculations and military trends. Today, the Ju-89 is perceived not as a real weapon, but as a ghost of unfulfilled power. Its footage and descriptions stir the imagination. The enormous machine, capable of carrying record loads and reaching altitudes inaccessible to competitors, never became part of the war for which it was created. It serves as a reminder that in aviation history, there has always been a fine line between technical genius and strategic miscalculation, and therefore, the Ju-89 lives not in the form of serial aircraft, but in memory as a symbol of what could have been, but never was,